Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the Catributors podcast. Tonight with our reoccurring guest, Drachinifel.
Hello.
You've been here a few times. Do you want to introduce yourself again?
Fair enough, I might as well. So, I'm Drachinifel. For those of you who don't know, I run the YouTube channel of the same name. Obviously focusing on naval history up till 1950. And since they've brought out a new line of capital ships, particularly British battle cruisers, I guess my return was somewhat inevitable.
Yep, definitely. I think we have said in the past, whenever they are going to release British battle cruisers, we need to get you back.
Yes.
You were particularly hard to persuade, I have to say, Drac, this time. Like, British battle cruisers, and you were like, when do you want me?
Yes, pretty much. Oh, dear.
Now, World of Warships has actually they've announced it in two parts, sort of with two dev blocks. So we will switch between those two. But in the newest one is actually the lowest one, like the tier 3 that I can't pronounce. So for me, it's like the impronounceable.
Yes, the indefatigable. I don't know what it is. No one who lives outside of the UK seems able to pronounce that word. Which is bizarre. For me, it's bizarre looking from the inside out, but I suppose everybody else probably looks at us equally strange.
I suppose it is. It's a more complicated collection of sounds than most English
yes,
words, I suppose. We were looking up the meaning last week, and I had to admit I couldn't quite define it. So it essentially means tireless for those people that are wondering what the word actually means.
Yeah, kind of tireless in the face of opposition. Yeah, I mean, if you've seen my naval engineering disasters video, you'll know I hate the indefatigable with the power of 1,000 burning suns. So when I saw it at tier 3, I was like, well, there's one I'm going to free XP past. Oh, you cannot imagine how much I hate that ship.
What is that turret arrangement called, by the way? I know it has a specific name, and I was trying to remember.
It's an echelon.
That's it.
Yes. Yeah. The I when I saw it come up, I was like, why? And then I realised, of course, when we had the British battleships, we had the Bellerophon as the tier 3, not Dreadnought. So my suspicion is that the Indefatigable is here at tier 3 because they're keeping Invincible for a tier 3 premium at some point.
That is quite possible.
Yeah, I mean, Invincible's the first battle cruiser. It's basically almost the same as Indefatigable, but actually better, weirdly. So the reason, the main difference between the Indefatigable and the Invincible class from a visual perspective is that they made the Indefatigables a little bit longer to give those two wing turrets a bit more cross-firing capability. Because the problem with the Invincibles in real life, which isn't reflected in World of Warships, is that unless you basically had all the guns at a perfect broadside, any angle slightly off of that, and the blast effects on the deck and superstructure were quite bad. So with the Indefatigable, they tried to, as I make it longer, so it had a bit more of an arc to play with. In-game, basically, the difference is going to be the Invincible just have slightly narrower firing arcs. The problem, and the reason why I hate the Indefatigables, and particularly Indefatigable itself, is that in stretching the ship, they didn't stretch the armor with it. So Invincible has a 6-inch belt fore to aft across its vitals, which, I mean, is not brilliant. It's okay for what its job was, hunting cruisers armed with 6-inch guns. But that's probably not going to be worth much of anything, to be honest, in World of Warships. But Indefatigable, instead of stretching the belt to 6 inches the whole way, they kept the 6 inches over the machinery spaces and over the center turrets. But if they're modeling it accurately, the belt armor over the fore and aft turrets is only 4 inches.
Why did they do that? Was it like a weight problem?
It was basically, it was a budget thing to save weight. Because when they were considering what to build as the second-generation battle cruisers, Admiral Fisher wanted to build a design that would basically be HMS Lion with a few minor differences. And he was told, no, that's too big and expensive. We're just going to repeat the previous one. And so they wanted it on about the same displacement for about the same cost. People on were already looking at Invincible going, I'm not so sure about those cross-firing angles. And so they went, okay, well, we'll improve that, but we don't want to spend the extra money and put in the extra weight for a longer 6-inch belt, so less armor. On New Zealand and Australia, which are the other two Indefatigable class, they actually did increase that end belt. Admittedly, only to 5 inches, but it's better than 4.
Hmm.
So that's why when people look at Jutland and people would point at Indefatigable blowing up, I kind of point out Indefatigable was going to blow up whatever happened. The minute that thing got hit, it was basically an XP pinata for the High Seas Fleet waiting to happen.
So basically, the ship didn't perform so well in actual combat.
No, it went to Jutland and it went boom. It was the first battle cruiser to go boom.
They could farm some detonation flags.
Yes.
Too soon? Too soon?
Actually, that's not a bad idea. I do need a few more detonation flags. I might keep one around just for those purposes. I mean, especially considering this is the tier where you've got things like Agincourt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, take it Indefatigable against Agincourt, or it's what else they've announced, the new Rio de Janeiro, which is basically Agincourt reskinned and restatted. Which is weird because they've made it slightly better than Agincourt and everything other than the secondary battery, even though it's the earlier iteration of it when it still belonged to Brazil. But nonetheless, you get 14 guns firing at you. One of those is going to find a magazine at your fore or after. Hey, free detonation flags for all.
Oh, I probably should point out, it being tier 3, I think you would have to fail div to be at tier 5s. I think. I can't remember. It's been so long since I've played any tier 3s. I can't remember if you see tier 5s, but I don't think you do.
I'm just used to the 3-tier spread. So
yeah, at lower tiers, the spread is different.
Okay. Shows you how long it's been since I went into the lower tiers. But in any case, to be honest, anything. I mean, even the US battleships, the US tier 4 turret farm will quite happily pop this thing. I mean, anything's going to pop it. It's just a matter of statistically how many shells are you going to get on target. So yeah, for people who are just coming into the game, Indefatigable may be something of an unwelcome introduction, shall we say.
I mean, to be fair, they won't spend a lot of time at tier 3 anyway.
No, it's true. It's true. But yeah, not terribly impressed.
Well, then up at tier 4, we go to the Queen Mary.
Yes. Now this one I am a lot more fond of. So we skipped Lion and Princess Royal, but to be fair, Queen Mary is just a slightly improved version of them. So doesn't make too much of. She's got the same gun layout for the main battery. She's got a slightly improved secondary battery. I notice in testing that they've actually given her in the modified hull format, she has some anti-aircraft. Not a lot, but at least when an aircraft comes past, you can hear someone going "daka daka daka" instead of the ominous silence of a completely unarmed ship.
You might shoot down some fighters.
Yeah. So obviously she's got 13.5-inch guns, along with Lion and Princess Royal. She's got this Q turret, so she's got 2 forward turrets, 1 turret at the back, and then 1 turret in the amidships. So a little bit more restricted firing arcs. If you're being chased, you will only have 1 turret available unless you do some slalom-style evasion. Speed's not too bad, again, in playtesting. This is the other interesting thing. This entire line does have its torpedoes. Obviously, Indefatigable is not currently in testing. Queen Mary is. She has a pair of broadside torpedo launchers, which is... I mean, you've only got 1 torpedo, and it's got a very restricted, almost broadside arc. But it is very funny, especially at low tiers, when people don't expect you to have any.
Yeah, there's always that thing with a new ship line that's got some new thing that people don't know yet.
I presume she's gonna get like the torpedo turning mechanic. I think that they're testing this only with a few of the British, like the newer ones. But I presume the whole line will get this feature.
Possibly. I mean, I didn't notice any torpedo turning, but Yeah, in testing. I mean, the first game I took it out in, I got 6 kills, including 2 cruisers, which I torpedoed, which was absolutely hilarious. You know, people going, "Oh yes, look at the silly capital ship coming in for close action. Its turrets can't track me if I speed down its side." It's like, no, they can't. My torpedo, on the other hand. From the limited gameplay I've got with it, I am actually quite enjoying it. I think it's a very good entry at tier 4. I mean, its companion in the British battleship line is the Orion, which is, you know, Queen Mary is not quite the contemporary of the Orion. It's the contemporary of the King George V, the World War I King George V, but it's near enough as makes no difference. Perfectly fine. There's not a great deal of material difference between Lion, Princess Royal, and Queen Mary, and there's not a huge difference between the Orions and the King George V outside of some secondary battery details. So she's a perfectly good entry. I think people will enjoy her a lot more than Indefatigable. Obviously, she is a British battle cruiser at the lower tiers, so 9 inches of armor at best. So don't be expecting to bounce anything unless you're at an extreme angle. But then again, it's tier 4, so unless you're in really, really bad straits, you shouldn't be worrying about that too much.
Yeah, generally speaking, accuracy at the lower tiers is kind of purposefully less good.
Yeah.
Make things a bit more survivable. But there's still plenty of HE spam around as well, still.
Yeah, and she packs a fairly solid punch. I mean, she's got obviously the British AP shells. So again, in what testing I've got, obviously that will be in work in progress. She does seem to be able to pop things quite happily. I haven't had many overpens, which is not something I can say about some of the later ships, but we'll get onto those when we get onto those. But yeah, it's nice that you got tier 3, tier 4. They're both historical ships, and whatever my personal feelings about the tier 3 might be, and probably actually Queen Mary a fairly solid candidate for tier 4.
It does. I think just looking at the sheer number of variations and slight differences, it's. I think there's always going to be someone somewhere that's like, "Oh, I wish they'd had this ship or that ship instead."
Yes. Well, I mean, you can make a case for all 4 of the so-called splendid cats, which is bizarre because only 2 of them were actually named after felines, but never mind. Because Lion is, of course, the flagship at Jutland. Well, it's BT's flagship, it's the battlecruiser flagship throughout most of the war. Princess Royal's probably got the weakest case, except that it's probably of the 4 ships, it's the one that comes out with the best record in terms of it does a fairly decent job of itself, and it doesn't get itself horribly mauled the way that Lion and Tiger do. Queen Mary is, of course, famous because she blew up at Jutland, but before she blew up, she was probably the best shooting of the British battle cruisers. And she's, if you're going to go for an original version Splendid Cat with Q turret, she's probably the best one to go for, which I think is why they've gone for her. And then after that, you get onto what they've decided to put at tier 5.
I should point out at this stage as well that there's always some amount of if you've got multiple ships of a class that had some differences. Wargaming usually does a little fudging between the lines in terms of things like the Fuso we have in game isn't actually Fuso, for example. They kind of take elements from the different ships of the class.
Essays, yeah.
Yeah, so
Fuso and Yamashiro.
So some of these might not be the Queen Mary might not exactly match with actual HMS Queen Mary stuff.
Yeah, well, let's say she's got this 2, like with most of the low tier stuff. She's got everything up to tier 10. She's got 2 hulls. The original hull is a little bit closer to realistic. The secondary hull basically has a Lion - Princess Royal 1918-1919 anti-aircraft fit, for all that's worth. But at least it exists. But of course, she wasn't around in 1918-19, so historically she didn't have that AA fit. But it's forgivable. It's not massively outlandish.
So on to tier 5, which is HMS Tiger.
Yes, HMS Tiger. So she's the last of the Splendid Cats. The main difference between her and the previous ones, apart from slightly redistributed armor scheme, is that her secondary batteries in now back encasemaents doesn't make the blindest bit of difference in game, but you'll notice Queen Mary has all of hers in the superstructure, which is a little bit of an annoyance from a historical perspective, because casement mounted guns are pretty useless in high seas. But regardless, her main visual distinction is that you've now got all of the turrets in something approximating the more traditional layout. So they're basically swapped the location of the aft boiler space and the Q turret. So you now have an X turret. It's not quite super firing because, like the Congos, the two aft turrets are quite spaced out. But you now have, two turrets forward, bridge, funnels, and then two turrets aft, even with this big spacing. So
was there like a reason to change turret location? Was the older system just not performing so well?
Yeah, well, there's a number of problems with having amidships turrets generally. One of which is that when it comes to firing big guns at long range, even things like what temperature your shells are and what temperature your propellant is going into the gun, and you might think it shouldn't make much of a difference. It's going up to thousands of degrees when we pull the trigger anyway. But it does make a difference. If your shells and cordite are going in at, let's say, arbitrarily 15 degrees in your forward turrets, and they're going in at 25 degrees in your middle turret, then those guns are going to shoot different range. The shells will travel a different distance, and it throws your accuracy off. And the reason the middle turrets are a problem is, you can see on Queen Mary, the turret sits between two funnels, which means it's sitting between two boiler spaces, which means if you want that magazine to be the same temperature as the magazines fore and aft, you either have to insulate it like anything, or you have to refrigerate it, or both. And that can be quite difficult because, of course, you don't want to overdo it either, because you don't want it to end up colder, because you'll have the same issues. And very, very few people who ever went with amidships turrets ever managed to make that work completely. It's actually one of the reasons why the Americans managed to persuade their Secretary of the Navy to go from the 12-gun turret farms with Utah and Arkansas and so forth. They managed to persuade them to go from that to the 10-gun layout on Texas and New York, and then from that to the 10-gun layout, but with fore and aft turrets instead of an amidships turret on the Nevadas. Because on the 12-inch ships, they were having these problems of machinery spaces fore and aft of the central magazines. They couldn't get the refrigeration system working properly. So it helps get all the machinery spaces in one place, which technically can be a bad thing if they take a torpedo hit, but that's what subdivision is for. But it makes your magazine supply easier. It makes your magazine insulation easier, and it also actually makes your gunnery easier. Because, on the Congos and Tigers, it's not fantastic. Apologies, I'll make sure that's not silent. Because the aft turrets are still quite spaced out, but they're not as spaced out as they were before. So the shell grouping is a little bit better, a bit closer to what the forward turrets should be like.
As Fu pointed out in the chat as well, there was definitely an element of like that. This is how we've been doing things up until now, so let's keep doing these things.
Yeah, as an approximately rough rule of thumb, it's not an actual design choice, because the Splendid Cats are all significantly longer and larger than their corresponding battleships. But as a very broad brush rule of thumb, the corresponding battle cruiser to the corresponding battleship class was basically delete a turret, add more machinery. Therefore, we go far and take off a bit of armor, and therefore we go faster. And the Orions, King George V's, and Iron Dukes all had 10 guns. So they had 2 forward, 1 in the middle, 2 aft. And when you look at a side profile of any of Lion, Princess Royal, or Queen Mary against an Orion or a King George V, you can see effectively how someone has just gone, okay, well, we'll remove the super firing after turret and put some more machinery in that location. That's where that funnel's kind of coming in. And then we're going quicker. So this is good. Whereas, after the issues that we just discussed came up, they're like, okay, maybe we want a slightly more conventional layout that most other people are going for. Tiger and Congo, which is obviously the Tier 5 Japanese battleship, actually were built at almost the same time. There's a lot of sometimes you see people going around saying, oh, one was a copy of the other. They either say, depending on who you ask, some people say Tiger is a British Congo, some people say Congo is a Japanese Tiger. They're both wrong, actually. They happen to look similar, and they happen to be built at the same time, it's true. And they even happen to have guns that within half an inch caliber of each other. But that's because they were both British designs. Congo was the Japanese going to the British and saying, we want a battle cruiser. And, the British shipyards coming back and saying, well, this is kind of the best we can do at the moment. Do you want it? And the Japanese going, yeah, sure. And shockingly enough, when the Royal Navy is building the battle cruisers, they're going with the best they can do at the time. So hence the layout is very similar, just with, as I say, with a slightly different caliber of main gun. So that in a way, they do have a common origin, but it's a common origin of it's roughly the same people designing the ships. It's not that they're cribbing notes from one to the other.
Yeah, that makes sense. You sort of see the same thing with kind of Italian and some Russian ship designs with the
destroyers and stuff.
Italian influences, but not necessarily, like things being copied necessarily.
Yeah, and Tiger actually, of all the ships we've covered so far, albeit there's 3, Tiger is the one that has the longest lifespan up to this tier, because obviously Queen Mary blows up at Jutland. The other 2, Lion and Princess Royal, are put in reserve and then scrapped shortly after World War I as a result of the London Naval Treaty. The surviving Indefatigables are Australia and New Zealand are scrapped shortly after with the Washington Naval Treaty as well. Ironically enough, also Queen Mary and Indefatigable both exploded at Jutland. So Tiger survives Jutland, and Tiger is actually kept around until the early 1930s. When she's decommissioned, she basically, her last job is standing in for Hood when Hood goes in for a refit, and then once Hood's back out into the fleet, Tiger is scrapped. And that's the end of the 13.5-inch gun in Royal Navy service, at least in frontline service. Iron Duke is still around in the Second World War, but as a training ship.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a lesser known fact to some people. I mean, it was only relatively recently that I, last year or 2 ago, and I was like, oh, wait, Iron Duke was around still at that point?
Yep, the Luftwaffe almost sank her, but she ran ashore. So was later refloated. Centurion as well, actually, was also around, but in an even more dilapidated state than Iron Duke. Centurion actually ended up being expended as part of the artificial harbours that were created on D-Day with a bunch of other obsolete ships. But yeah, Iron Duke, as the flagship of the Grand Fleet at Jutland, was kind of kept around in Scapa Flow, as they beached initially after the Luftwaffe bombed her, and then later refloated. Also used as a decoy, amongst other things. The Royal Navy had quite a lot of fun dressing up Iron Duke and a few other merchant ships pretending to be more modern battleships and the occasional aircraft carrier just to play with the Germans' heads. It actually did a fairly convincing job as well. If you look at some of the photos, if you just take a glance at it, you'd go, "Oh yeah, that's a King George V class battleship," or "That's HMS Hermes." And it's only when you take a second look, you're like, "Hang on a minute, that's not a warship hull." That you realise it's an oil tanker or something dressed up. And obviously, in the case of Iron Duke, it is actually a warship hull. It's just a slightly smaller warship hull.
that is something I think the British were probably better at than a lot of their contemporaries was that kind of informational deception and warfare.
Yeah, they were very
In
sneaky.
that period.
And it's probably very hard to spot the details from like the cockpit of a plane in World War II.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean we've all seen copies of the aerial recon photos that were taken. They're not exactly 4K, 100% in focus, etc. It's kind of like, well, it's a slightly pointy blur with this many turrets with maybe this many guns on each turret. Therefore, it's this. So you didn't really have to push the boat out too far. I mean, considering that in the desert and before D-Day, they were also able to fool aerial recon with inflatable tanks, which I'm fairly sure don't look anything like the real thing up close.
Didn't they? They also had, they kind of did the opposite as well. Sometimes they would dress tanks up as trucks.
Yes. Yeah, especially half tracks, which made the disguising of the lowest half even easier.
Well, I mean, if you consider even things like misidentification was a pretty common thing anyway. I mean, like the number of Tiger tanks people reported engaging versus actual Tiger tanks, that sort of with subsequent investigation turned out to be like Panzer IVs or something like that.
Yes.
If you're in the middle of a battle and someone's shooting at you, you tend to assume it's the biggest, scariest thing you can imagine. And even in naval terms, you have was it the Fleet Air Arm or the Royal Air Force that had to go up one of the cruisers that was shadowing the Bismarck because they thought it was the Bismarck from the air.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Fleet Air. When the Fleet Air Arm, they went after HMS Sheffield.
Yes, that was it, Sheffield.
Yeah. Yeah. And they were very, very lucky that they were using magnetic detonators on their torpedoes that turned out to be hilariously faulty. They basically either detonated on contact with the water or not at all, which meant that Sheffield was actually fairly safe, even though if they didn't know it at the time. So in a weird way, although they didn't make them very popular with Sheffield's crew, it kind of worked out for the best because it meant that the aircraft could then turn around, go back to Ark Royal and say, "Oi, these aren't working, put the old contact detonators back in," before they went off after Bismarck.
I'm sure that wasn't much consolation to the crew of the Sheffield being used as target practice.
No, I mean they kind. It's weird depending on which crew account from Sheffield you read. Some of them seem to have gotten over it a lot faster than others, and certainly the command staff seem to have taken it in relatively good humour once they realised they weren't going to die. Because when the second strike from Ark Royal went off, they came across Sheffield again, and because it was low visibility, a bunch of them actually flew down to Sheffield to ask where Bismarck was. And Sheffield, the second time, was like, "They're over there."
Anyway, we've got a little sidetracked. So at Tier 6, we have,
Renown.
in my eyes, the best looking model of the bunch by far.
Oh, yes. Yeah. This model is going to make an awful lot of people very happy. Because this is, of course, the refitted Renown, because we already have Repulse at Tier 6 as a premium. Repulse in her older format. She was semi-modernized in the interwar period, so she's not in her World War I format. She does have some AA defense and so forth. But the Renown had a full modernization. And this is fully modernized Renown. So she's going to have a lot more capable AA battery than Repulse. She has those pancaked, I call them pancake turrets, dual 4.5-inch guns. And that is going to be a fairly common feature going forward because that was basically the standard British refit anti-aircraft gun for capital ships. The 5.25 was for new ships, but all the refits got the 4.5. Which, to my mind, arguably was actually a better weapon system for World War II, but never mind.
I'm sure we've had this discussion previously as regards, was it carriers or something? I can't remember, but the absolute sort of plethora of differences in terms of secondary armaments applied to different ships as the war went on.
Yeah. The 4.5 pancake turret was, as I say, it was actually invented for use on British aircraft carriers, like you mentioned, first deployed on Ark Royal. So it's the primary anti-aircraft and anti-surface armament of aircraft carriers that the British build. So the Illustriouses, the Indefatigables, actually even the Audaciouses have them, at least to start with. But when they were refitting ships, so Renown, Valiant, and Queen Elizabeth, not Warspite, because Warspite was basically the first one to be modernized, so they hadn't quite worked out what they wanted to do with the modernization program yet. But so yeah, Renown, Queen Elizabeth, and Valiant, they all had these 4.5-inch guns fitted as their anti-aircraft equipment. The turrets were slightly lighter, slightly easier to fit than the 5.25s, which was probably a good thing anyway. As I say, in World War II, they probably actually performed a bit better. And you could have 5 of them per side as opposed to 4 per side with the 5.25s. You know, if any of the others like Hood, etc., had their refits, they would have had almost certainly the 4.5 as well. And actually, the gun, if not the mounting, then went on to form the basis of the 4.5-inch that was used on late war British destroyers. So if you're playing high-tier British destroyers, that 4.5-inch gun is near enough the same gun, just in a different turret.
That's the Tier 9 and Tier 10, I think.
Yeah, the Daring and the Battle.
Jutland.
Yeah, Jutland. And then in a real sort of ongoing legacy, that 4.5-inch gun, with a few minor variations, has then gone on to be the deck gun of every single Royal Navy warship up to the present day, bar the 5-inch, which they stuck on the Type 45s. So the Type 23s that are still in service and the Type 42s that were in service up until a few years ago, they all had the 4.5-inch gun, as did all their predecessors.
It's interesting the kind of the legacy some of these weapons have had, like how long-lasting they've ended up being.
Yeah. I mean, the Americans in a similar situation with, I mean, their long barrel 5-inch as opposed to 5-inch 38, which is what most of their stuff has in game and in World War II. But the long barrel 5-inch that you see on some of the later higher tier ships in game, again, is kind of the basis of the 5-inch gun that to this day they're still using. Because if it doesn't break, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So they just stick an autoloader on it and call it a day.
Yes, they are a bit faster firing these days. If anyone's ever seen a video of these things being test fired, they really pump out the rounds.
Yeah, but I think Renown for me is definitely going to be one of those ones I'm going to be keeping.
Oh yeah, it just looks fantastic. It's just one of those certain models in the game just end up like I guess they just end up being really good representations of the ships, or else they just end up being I don't know. They just have some quality, and if it turns out to be fun to play as well, that'll be a bonus.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing is obviously, like Repulse, she's only got 6 guns. So she's got 6 15-inch guns. Should do all right. Her armor layout will also be very slightly different to Repulse's, but modernized fire control, modernized AA, she should actually be overall a slightly better ship than Repulse. And again, although she's not in game for testing at the moment, but if she's following the line that every other British battlecruiser that is in the game for testing at the moment is following, then she will have torpedoes, which Repulse doesn't. So I suspect that the sort of why would you ever buy Repulse as the premium? It will probably be because, as you probably know, Repulse is an absolute speed demon.
Oh, yes.
So Renown will probably be slightly saner in terms of her speed, and Repulse will just be the speedboat.
I also wouldn't be surprised if Renown is less accurate.
Which would be very weird, because obviously she is the fully modernized ship with all the radar and everything, so she should be the more accurate, but
that's one of those gameplay things.
Yes, that's a gameplay mechanic.
What I've been wondering when I look at the model, it looks like all of the anti-air stuck on it is like at the back, while it looks like there's a lot of space at the sides where one could have mounted anti-air. Is there a reason that it seems so centralized, or is it just...
I think it may just be a glitch with the game model at the moment, because... if you look at the photo at the moment, you can just about see a pair of pancake 4.5s on the aft area of the main run of the superstructure. Now there should be so if you're going from there forward, You can see kind of a dip, which is where the scout aircraft launches from. Then there's a little build up, then another dip where there's a boat. There should be 3 more of those adjacent to the forward funnel and the bridge on this raised area. So I think that's just an incomplete model.
Yeah, I mean these are the work in progress models that they've shared, so they might not be fully.
Yeah. So there will be there should be another 3 turrets on there, and trust me, if they're not included, there will be blood.
Actually, there's a thing I can post in the chat from Wikipedia. There we go. That actually shows the 3 turrets quite clearly there.
Yeah, she's a very, very good looking ship. Now the interesting thing that I'm going to find is she also had some very, very nice camo schemes that help accentuate her looks, and I'm intrigued to see which one, if any, will be available.
There are some. I mean, I think particularly for the US, there are a couple of camo schemes I'd really like to see in the game that just aren't on any of the ships. So yeah, sometimes it would be nice to have a wider choice for these things.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen the kind of the grey with the blue stripe down the side. For the basically where the blue stripe kind of occupies the armor. We've seen that on a few of the higher tier British ships. Renown did have that, but she also had a really nice looking semi camo scheme where basically the hull was darker and the superstructure was lighter. There were a few dazzle camos and everything, but I personally think that that's the best looking of the camo schemes that she ended up in, because it really accentuates her lines.
Well, if previous releases are to go by, there'll be some kind of early access camo for the line that probably won't be in any sense historical, but it'll also come out with a perma camo as well of some kind.
If they're going to do that, please, for the love of all things holy, finally do the British late Victorian black, white, and buff camo. Those ships would look so good in that, especially Renown. I don't know what I have to do to just get them to introduce that as a permanent, nationwide British camo scheme. But as soon as I figure it out, I will do it.
There's something. I mean, that kind of exists for the heavy cruisers.
Yeah, they got that white and gold one though. Yeah, which is that's the tropical camo scheme. But yeah, trust me, if you see, it's actually very similar to Mikasa's, because the Japanese took a lot of influence from the Royal Navy. But if you imagine Mikasa's camo but looking even better, that's kind of what the British one would be.
I mean, once they separate the economics from the visuals, I still have hope that they will more widely monetize visuals and maybe bring a lot more historic camo schemes. That would be nice.
Yeah. I mean it's getting slightly off topic, but I do wonder sometimes, once they've created a camo scheme for the camo scheme patterning for the hull, when we all know what paint schemes, skins, camos, etc. look like in the game file mode for any game. It's kind of this slightly disorientated jumble of things that then get applied to the model polygons. But I do kind of wonder if maybe as a we had the Normandy, I think it was, when the French battleships came out, there was that fan design competition, and we eventually ended up with the liner camo, which looks really good. It
does. To me, I mean, and I've said this on Twitter as well before, but the West Coast ferries, Caledonian Brain, it really resembles their livery.
Yes.
So I think it was the Calmac camo.
So it'll be, I do wonder sometimes if maybe they should release templates for the various ship camos, and then just go, you know what, I mean, if you remember way back in the day, with World of Tanks, you used to be able to download third-party skins via tanks, and only you could see them, but that's all that really mattered. And then they brought in obviously their own camos, but I just wonder if maybe they should release templates for various ships and maybe do mini competitions like they did for the Normandy one.
They do periodically do these contests. Like Blishkevitsa's actually got 2, for instance. And I think there's one for at least one of the other destroyers. But yeah, it's not that often. And I've actually looked into, like, it is possible to create your own custom camos, but it's quite an involved process, and you need to have the right software to do it.
Yeah, but the thing is, there are people out there, if they made it a little bit more accessible, I suspect there'd be a lot more people who would do it. And ultimately, if they do it with the caveat of, like, you know, if we select your camo for implementation in the game, then, well, it's ours now, thanks very much. You know, it's, you know, cosmetic enhancements of that's the way you make money in a lot of online games. Nobody cares if you want to spend £4 on making your ship look pretty, because it's not going to change the way it fights.
Yes, and it's something that wargaming's been kind of very slow to get to where we are now. I mean, it took a really long time to get any kind of custom elements on your tanks and model tanks, for instance.
Yeah.
Look at how War Thunder does it. That's actually one of the kind of the ability to customize, to some extent anyway, how your tank looks and the placement of different decals and elements or whatever. Like War Thunder is a lot more flexible in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand to a certain degree why they might be a little bit hesitant, because, of course, as with most things on the internet, if you do something nice, someone will come along and ruin it. So you can imagine somebody would just do something incredibly obscene and then
there are plenty
it.
of things, and you look on the War Thunder Reddit and people have like gotten semi-naughty things written on their tanks or planes or whatever by combining different things together. So there's definitely that element as well.
But I'm relatively sure you could come up with something. It's not going to be that difficult to secure the system in such a way that, you know, only official camos will actually properly display on the screen. But that's why I say you share a template rather than the actual file. So people fill in the template, and then it should be a relatively easy conversion process as long as it's the right resolution. But yeah, it's just something I'd really like to see, because then at that point I'd just be like, you know what? Even if you don't want to do the black, white, and buff camo scheme yourself, Wargaming, I'll do it.
That would be if they a bit more readily supported that, and doing your own, like even doing something like your own flags or signals or things like that. Like that's one thing I have been able to mod in myself is replacing a couple of flags. But it took a little bit of doing, a little bit of reading to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
But it's certainly less complicated than trying to do your own camos, which was a whole involved process.
I mean, they could just make an in-game tool where you could have certain patterns and then just at least change the colors for the patterns, because
this is a completely different game, but Payday 2 actually lets you do that. They have got specific skins for the guns, and there's a whole like trading market, and some of them are really cheap, and others actually have stat changes to the guns, so they cost a bit more. But alongside that, there is the ability to apply, even if you don't have any skins, you can still apply custom colors and some patterns to your weapons to customize them, to personalize them. So that kind of thing. Like at the moment, the very most limited form we have, and the only form we have, is the ability on some ships to change to an alternate color scheme, but you don't get to pick what the alternate colors are. So
that shouldn't be too hard, right? Like basically you just have to like pinpoint that one color and on the skin and change it to something else. That's something you can do usually very quickly in any editing program. So I feel like obviously you'd need to program it into the game first, but and then I mean you could sell different patterns and different colors and just let the people decide how the ships want to look like, right? And there is already the option to like disable a lot of special camos, so you could have an option disable custom colors or whatever, so you don't have to watch the pink fleet if you don't want to.
Yeah.
But, you know...
Yeah, and it's kind of like in World of Tanks, you can apply various things, see if you like them, and then hit buy. So,
Yes.
and it's like unit painters have been a thing in so many games for so long.
Yeah.
So it should be a combination of the two. Just be like, right, well, here, play around with the colors on your camo templates, even as say in game. Play around with the colors, play with your sliders. When you're happy, hit buy for X number of doubloons, and then you've got your own custom colored ship.
That would have been the more obvious example. I don't know why I went to Payday first, but yeah, no, World of Tanks lets you do that as well, doesn't it? You can, you can put different solid colors on different parts of your tank, for instance.
Yeah,
create your own kind of look. So yeah,
well,
there's definitely a lot of scope for that.
Yeah, there you go, Wargaming. Free advice for making money and making everyone else happier because you can have pretty color ships. Oh dear.
So, trying to get vaguely back to the topic at hand.
Yes.
Now we're getting now into basically the paper design. So, Rook at tier 7.
Right. So now we're entering, as you say, the paper phase. Everything after this is actual, what I call legitimate paper, i.e., someone actually did sketch this out seriously. Or slight variations thereof. So basically, in the immediate aftermath of World War One, when it was looking like everyone was going to do another naval arms race, the British looked at 2 sets of designs. They looked at a battleship design and a battlecruiser design, and they were all coded with a letter and a number. So they started at the middle of the alphabet. And so the first battlecruiser designs were the K series, and the corresponding battleship design was an L series. And then they went in opposite directions. So the battleships went to L to M, finally to N, and then you got the N3. And the battle cruisers went back up the alphabet. So you got K, then J, then I, then H, and then G, which is where they finished up. And technically they went to F, and battleships went to O when they were looking at the Nelson designs, but that wasn't part really of the actual main design line. And then for each letter, you had 2 designs, but they had the number, so you had a 2 and a 3, and that basically was twin turrets or triples. So with one exception, which we'll come to a bit later on, but with one exception, all the designs, if it's a 2, that means it's got 4 twins, and if it's a 3, it means it's got 3 triples. And they're basically trying to go, okay, here's our spec. This is the gun caliber we want. This is the performance characteristics we want. And then how does it affect displacement, armor, layout, cost, size, etc., by having it with 4 twins versus 3 triples? And the one design, one of 2 designs that's not represented from the battlecruiser design list that the British drew up rephrase. So of the various designs, 2 are not represented in the 7, 8, 9, 10 line, and the rest are. The very first one was K2, K3. That's not in. That's a battle cruiser with 18-inch guns. And then the next one, which is what Rook is, this is J3, which was kind of a whiplash because K3 and K2 were absolute monsters for their time, and generally they were over 50,000 tons mounting 18-inch guns on 30 knots. So it's pretty scary. J3 was basically the British looking at that and going, that costs how much exactly? And then winding everything right back. So when you look at Rook at tier 7, which is basically design J3, she does look very much like Hood in some ways, of a general profile, and that's because basically they took the Admiral class design and went, what about that except in triple? So that's why there's no J2, because J2 is basically Hood.
I see.
J3 is kind of an updated Hood design with triple 15s.
What you were saying about the Ks makes me wonder if we might see one of those as a super ship at the end of that line at some point.
It would not surprise me in the slightest. Yeah, they were very
I also
scary.
had the thought when you were saying that kind of like there was that 1920s arms race. Basically, it seemed at some point, at least vaguely possible, that there might be a naval war between, well, it'll be a primarily naval war between the US and the UK. You know,
yes,
in some alternate timeline somewhere, these monsters were fighting Tillmans on the high seas.
Yeah, the US UK tensions basically rose and fell on the strength of US elections. Where have we heard that before? But no, because basically you had Wilson's government in the latter part of World War One, and then into through to the end of the 1910s, and Wilson and his party were very much kind of, you know, manifest destiny. We want a 2-ocean navy, etc., etc. They wanted to be the top dog. And then government changed with the first election of the 1920s, and then the opposite party, I can't remember which way around it was, and to be honest, their politics were so different back that it probably doesn't matter. But anyway, the other guys got in, and the other guys were basically, well, actually, no, we kind of like to go back to the old isolationist policy. So they weren't quite so keen on the massive trying to outbuild Britain thing that Wilson and his lot were after. And that's why you get, part of the reason why you get the Washington Naval Treaty is basically them going, no, we don't want to actually get into a naval arms race, so let's talk. Obviously, they were still going to negotiate in America's interest, and thanks to, you know, building throughout World War One when Britain wasn't, they had gotten to a point where, at least in terms of modern ships, they were close enough to matching the UK that they could make an equality stick, which is what you got with the Washington Treaty. But the J3, so they're sort of pointing it back to the Tier 7, so the J3 was kind of midway down the design line that the British were looking at of what can we build post-war as our battle cruiser. And the whole thing obviously gets cancelled by Washington. But yeah, so J3 makes a fair amount of sense at a Tier 7, because we've already got Hood sitting in there. So this is, in a lot of ways, this is kind of Hood with a slightly different secondary batch, because of course they've given her a kind of World War II-ish refit. So they've gone with these twin 6-inch turrets, which you previously will have seen on Nelson, which is kind of the immediate post-World War I British secondary turret. And so they've kept some of those, I think actually all of them, in, and then stuck some of the 4.5-inch in as a refit thing. But yeah, again, Rook is one of the ones that's available for playtesting. She's quite fun. Like Hood, her 15-inch guns actually do pretty well in sort of Tier 7-8 battles. She is a little bit caught short at Tier 9, but then most Tier 7s are. And she has broadside torpedo launchers, which again make themselves known occasionally when you want to be a little bit irritating.
Yeah, I presume she's also getting like the torpedo turning mechanic if they're gonna stick with that.
If they do it, I haven't noticed it myself. They just seem to run as normal. But to be honest, I don't actually tend to pay that much attention to my torpedoes once they're launched. I'm just like, I've launched them in vaguely the right direction. If they hit, fantastic. And if they don't, well, I've got some things to shoot at. The funny thing is that at the moment, and we'll come on to this a bit more when we talk about the Tier 10, but at the moment, most of the British battle cruisers are supposedly set up as kind of mid to long range snipers, and then they're playing with the concept of maybe making them into brawlers with a Tier 10. But when I'm looking at them, I'm like, well, with these sort of hybridized refits, these ships actually have a fairly large secondary battery, with a relatively respectable baseline range. So it's very difficult to resist the temptation to just go full secondary build spec and run in screaming. Which, to be fair, is kind of what I do a lot of the time anyway when I'm playing the game. So it does appeal, but at the same time, it's not exactly the world's best protected ship.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is hood armor. So go charging in, and you will probably die.
Yeah, Hood is pretty durable if you kind of keep to the mid-long ranges and make sure you're angling properly.
Yeah, and it's the same thing I found with Rook. I am actually quite enjoying her. Both Queen Mary and Rook, so far at the testing stage at least, are very enjoyable ships to play.
So then we are we're back on the other page now.
Yes.
Hawk at tier 8.
Yeah, Hawk's a little bit of an anomaly because you'll notice she has triple turrets, so she's a 3 design. But K3 and J3, which we've just discussed as Rook, are the only ships that actually have this, 2 forward, 1 aft layout. And K3 has 18-inch guns. J3, as we've just said, has 15-inch guns. This thing has 16-inch guns.
I was wondering, are these, because it doesn't say on the page itself, and you might just know this on the basis of, that you know stuff. But are these going to be the same 16-inch guns that are on Nelson, or are these kind of more modern design?
In theory, they should be. Because this whole design series is culminated with the G3s, and then the Nelson inherited the G3 turrets, massively pared down in the sort of structural build quality, which is part of the reason why they had so many issues. But in theory, these should be the Nelson guns, albeit with possibly slightly better performance overall to model the fact that these would be the 16-inch guns as they were supposed to be built, not the 16-inch guns after we've pared away literally everything to the point they're slightly wobbly. So, yeah, I mean, the 16-inch guns are historical, but this particular layout of, the K3...
This has been through the wargaming...
Yes. Yeah, because I've seen elsewhere. I've seen elsewhere in one of the blogs they actually refer to the Hawk as the K3 design, which it's like, okay, fair enough. You look at the superstructure, comparing the Rook to the Hawk. There are a number of differences. So and with the secondary layout as well. So she does seem to be a K3 hull, but if it is a K3 hull, they've dropped the armament down from 18 inches to 16 inches, presumably just to keep it in line in the game. Which,
18 inch at tier 8 would be a bit. Your tier 6s, that would be slightly terrifying.
I can kind of see where they were coming from with this, because there is only one other full 16-inch design in the British late 1910s, early 1920s battle cruiser development line, which is the G3s, which we'll come on to in a bit. There were some with 16.5-inch guns, which we'll run into a bit later, but the only other one that's not G3 that has 16-inch guns is the H3 series, and those are kind of for as much as you can say for this entire series, ultra light ones with just a pair of 16s. So you've only got 6 guns, or maybe 6 16.5s, depending on exactly which variant you want to go with. So and there's also an H3 variant actually with 6 18-inch guns. So I mean, if you wanted to stick with purely historical, I personally would have been tempted to just go with one of the H3 designs instead. But I can also appreciate how difficult that would be to balance, considering we're coming off of a 9-gun ship. We've gone, so we've had our 6-gun ship at Renown. We've gone to 9 guns. At tier 8, 6 guns, even 6 16-inch would be pushing it. And 6 18s, I mean, we've got 6 18-inch in the game, but it's, things like Georgia at tier 9. So again, downgrading a 6 18-inch armament to tier 8 would be difficult to justify. 6 16.5s maybe, if they'd gone with maybe the H. But the problem is, if they'd gone with the H3A, which would have 2 triples forward, that is the 18-inch variant. So, at that point, they would have just been downgrading to 16-inch another design. So, yeah, I suppose downrating the K3s, it does give some continuity, at least before you get into the truly special designs, because you've gone from kind of an echelon to Q turret to almost conventional layout with Tiger to conventional layout with Renown, conventional layout with Rook, and now Hawk is still conventional-ish layout before we go back to being special again. So I can see the reasoning, but of the main line of British battle cruisers, they are the least historical. We'll talk about the Collingwood in a bit.
Yes, I think we'll do the tech tree and then we'll get onto the Collingwood.
Yes, that is. This is a ship for causing me great anger, but never mind. Actually, I'm just reading that thing. It says here the battleships will benefit from the new torpedo turning mechanic. Okay, so that would explain why they've got the slightly wider fire angles, perhaps. Yeah, whatever.
Yes, it wasn't really. Yeah. It's been hard to. I think they gave some numbers, but yeah, we don't really have an idea of quite how wide the things are.
No, so yeah, I mean, obviously Hawks are not available for testing in game. Otherwise, I suspect she should probably do okay. I mean, it's 9 16-inch guns. Admittedly, it's not 9 Iowa 16-inch guns, but Iowa is up there at tier 9, and we've got the South Dakotas, Alabama, Massachusetts, etc., at tier 8. So we've 9 16-inch guns at tier 8 seems to be a fairly solid bit of solid armament. If it is truly the K3 hull, as they're saying that it is, the armor should be pretty good. Angled 12-inch. So it's in theory, assuming that everything else they've said about them is true, it will basically just be like, in a lot of ways, almost like taking an Alabama or a Massachusetts out, except with a few extra knots on it. Which is not a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if they are touching then the armor too for consistency's sake.
Yeah. I mean, this is it is one of the slightly odd things in that a lot of these designs that the British were doing in this whole, if you like, tech tree, the paper post World War I designs, an awful lot of them, up to and including Nelson, which is of course already in the game, all involve sloped armor or angled armor to increase its effectiveness, and not a terribly bad thickness of armor to start with, which is of course something you see with the later US fast battleships in as well in the 1930s and 40s, which is of course your higher tier stuff in the game for the US. But it's interesting the British go through this design stage and build the Nelsons in the first part of the interwar period. The Americans build their version with sloped armor at the end of the interwar period, but by that point the British have gone back to just massive slabs with the King George V's for whatever reason. I mean, that's a whole other story.
I was just looking at the preliminary stats they've given, and it does on those 16-inch have even if the AP performance isn't quite there, it still has the 45% fire chance, and nearly 70 millimeters of penetration. So,
but only 1.5
just like Nelson,
Sigma.
you'll still be able to get the terrifying HE shells.
But they're going for rather inaccurate guns.
Yeah, the Sigma value, the higher the Sigma is better, isn't it?
Yes. It tends to range from, I think at the low tiers you get things like 1.4 is probably around the lowest, up to, I think 2.1 is the highest on any ship. I don't pretend to quite understand the maths, but yeah, basically the Sigma is a big part of the accuracy formula, but there's also like I can't remember if it's horizontal or vertical dispersion.
I mean, you have two dispersions, like horizontal and vertical. They form an ellipse, and Sigma tells you how the shells are like distributed inside the ellipse. So higher Sigma means more shells go towards the center of it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it's all statistics and stuff. I don't know. Numbers. How do they work?
It's math, clearly evil.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how she performed. The other interesting thing is, of course, now obviously we're now into our second paper ship. They've, for people who are unaware, they have actually decided to name them all after British admirals.
Yes.
So Admiral Rook, Admiral Hawk. Actually, one of my favourite admirals is Admiral Hawk. A little bit mad, in fact, very mad. But
that wasn't necessarily an impediment in the Age of Sail.
No. As I've said numerous times on my channel, Admiral Hawk is literally single-handedly responsible for probably the closest thing you'll ever see to the Pirates of the Caribbean 3 Maelstrom battle fought in real life, except he did it with an entire fleet, not 2 ships. Yeah, there's a whole story behind the Battle of Quiberon Bay. At some point, I'll get that done on my channel.
Sounds like it would be an entertaining one.
Yeah.
So, we're getting to Tier 9, where things are going a little off the rails.
Yes, Tier 9, the Duncan, the ship that I have been waiting for to see in the game ever since they decided that they were going to do, British ships, period. The G3 battle cruiser. This was a ship that was actually ordered. Well, there were ordered 4 of them, and depending on whose accounts you read, they did actually start collecting materials. And if you believe 1 or 2 accounts, possibly even laid the keel for these things before, or at least one of them before the Washington Treaty, put the damper on that. These things are armed with triple 16-inch guns in their actual design, although I noticed that in the blog at least they're talking about 419mm, which means they're looking at the 16.5-inch early variant, which would be an interesting choice, but not a terrible one. I mean, a little bit of extra firepower never goes amiss. But it was the 16.5-inch gun was something they did investigate, because after the brief dalliance going back to 15 inches with the J3, they really wanted to have 18-inch guns on both their battleships and battle cruisers. And that's one of the reasons why there's so many different battle cruiser designs, because they were, just playing around all the time going, can we get decent armor, decent speed, and 18-inch guns on something that'll fit in like more than one dry dock? And it turned out the answer was no. And
decision for the 419s, just to interject, is because that's what the Conqueror and the Lion use as well. So it's just to bring uniformity.
Yeah, fair enough. And it's and then it was kind of it's kind of almost the stages of grief. And they were onto the bargaining stage, and they were like, okay, well, if we can't have the 18-inch, they knew that the Americans with the Colorados and the Japanese with the Nagatos were going with 16, and they're like, well, if we can't have this 18, maybe we can still have something a bit better. And no one wanted to design a 17-inch gun for whatever reason. And so they're like, well, we can have a 16.5, because the British had up to that point increased their battleship gun calibers in increments of 1.5 inches from 12 to 13.5, 13.5 to 15. 18 was jumping 2 increments because it's 3 inches. And they're like, okay, well, the intermediate would have been a 16.5, so let's see if we can get a 16.5 in. Also turned out the answer was no. And so the final G3 design had 16-inch, which they're kind of begrudgingly, well, at least it's the same as everybody else's, at least caliber-wise. But, they're fast. They have very similar armor, again, in theory, assuming they've gone with the proper armor model, to the Iowa's sloped armor, actually slightly, just fractionally, a bit thicker than the Iowa's. So in theory, their armor scheme should be more durable than the Iowa's, which is hilarious given that they're battle cruisers. But we shall see how it's implemented, and obviously, area of coverage, etc., will make a big difference as well. But as you can see, their main feature to try and save weight in order to try and have this pretty good fast battleship scale armor scheme was to bring the aft turret forward. So it's now sitting just behind the superstructure with all the machinery stacked aft. And then obviously the later evolution we'd see with Nelson is just swapping the position of the superstructure and that aft gun to make it an all-forward design. But this was kind of the intermediary stage. So you can't actually fire, again, you can't fire in the rear arc at all, but do actually have some fairly nice arcs for forward fire.
Yeah, it's going to be, presumably you've got at least some decent amount of secondaries in that aft section, but yeah, the firing angles on this are going to be interesting. I don't think we've got anything else that is even quite close to this. Probably the absolute closest you would get would be like Nelson and Izumo, but even then it's yeah, and the turrets do seem to turn pretty quick. So because in overall layout terms, the layout is kind of like the Izumo, in that the aft turret, or at least the old school Izumo, where the aft turret has to do the full 270 when the front two only have to do a 90-degree travel arc. But from what I've seen so far on the ones on the ship, obviously Duncan herself isn't in game, but on the other British battle cruisers, their turn speed does seem to be relatively decent. So you shouldn't have to wait an age for that aft turret to swing round, which is good.
Yeah, they say 180-degree turn time is 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Which comparable to I think Italians have that generally as well. So fairly quick response for a battleship.
Yeah. And the reason for this bunching, as I said, is basically to try and minimize the length of the overall armored citadel. So that means obviously if you have less length of belt armor, that means you save weight, and if you're prepared to have the same displacement anyway, that means you can increase the armor, which is one of the reasons, because a lot of people, they kind of look at it and go, how are they going to do this? Because the displacement is roughly what the Iowas came out at, but they're somehow supposed to be able to do about the same speed, just a fraction less maybe, for much less horsepower, and they've got a similar kind of armament, but they've got better protection, and it's 20 years before the Iowa was designed. How is this possible? And it's a combination of, the armament layout means they can save weight. The machinery layout actually is also in a way saving weight, because with the machinery further back, your prop shafts don't need to be as long, and prop shafts and their associated bulkheads weigh a fair bit. And also because you can start narrowing the aft hull a lot sooner, you can actually get a much more efficient hydrodynamic shape.
Okay.
Which partly explains why they're able to, on paper at least, get up to a 32, maybe 33 knots on much less horsepower. And the other thing is their target speed is just a fraction slower than the Iowas. There's a huge amount of horsepower that you need. Once you get into the 30-knot regimen, you're talking about 30 to 50% more horsepower per knot until you hit about 35 knots, and then it just starts getting truly stupid.
Yeah, I was just thinking the hull overall. I think if you could look at it from the top, you would notice there's distinct similarity to the Nelson. Obviously, it's a lot more elongated, but yeah, it's definitely, you can see the lineage there.
Yeah, because basically they did a kind of a fusion dance when the Washington Treaty came in, and they were told, well, you can have two ships with 16-inch guns, but they have to be 35,000 tons and no more. They kind of did this fusion dance between the G3s and the N3s, and came up with the Nelsons, which were technically design 03 because they're battleships. But yeah, G3. I've been looking forward to seeing this in game for so long.
I do wonder with these higher tier ones if we're going to see them ending up being more kind of armored and tanky than the actual battleships, because the battleships that we have are heavily reliant on their, like, the armor's okay, but they're very much reliant on the super heal. They're very spongy.
Yes. Well, I mean, it is a bit of a weird one because, these are battle cruisers on paper, but they're actually better armored, in some cases significantly better armored than a number of battleships that were either contemporary with them or in some cases even post-dated them.
And this is where we start to get into the very blurry line between, what's at this kind of stage, what's a battle cruiser versus what's a fast battleship.
Yes, yeah, and I mean, if the G3s, if the British had designed the G3s and just said this is going to be our battleship, everyone would have just gone, oh, it's a very fast battleship, cool. The only reason anyone ever calls them battle cruisers is because they designed the N3s, which were basically floating bricks with 18-inch guns strapped to the top.
Yes.
So by comparison, the G3s look a little bit fragile, but they really aren't. So yeah, they're going to be an interesting one to see, especially with this, as you mentioned, the anti-aircraft battery concentrated almost entirely aft. There's a secondary turret at the Brit superstructure level, but almost all of the guns are going to be right aft, which again is similar to the Nelsons, but on a much larger hull. There's potential to store a lot more guns.
Yeah, you can see a 6, and then it's one of those pancake 4.5s amidships, and then
yes,
a couple of AA on the bridge area, and then everything else is just kind of around the tunnels and after the funnels and after that. So then we're on to the tier 10, the St. Vincent.
Yes, St. Vincent tier 10. So this is I3, which is a couple of variant designs further back, and this is back from the point when they're still trying to get 18-inch guns on. So it is an 18-inch gun ship. It's very fast. The armor is actually slightly worse than G3. This was one of the things they did when they were down, because one of the major problems, as I said, was fitting it into certain dry docks, Malta, Gibraltar, etc. And one of the major selling points of the G3s with their smaller armament was we can get them in the dry docks, but increasing the armor weight didn't increase the length, so that's what they did. So bizarrely enough, again assuming they go with historical values, the St. Vincent is less well protected than the Duncan. On the other hand, it has triple 18-inch guns. And in game at the moment, this is where the bit we said we're going to talk about earlier, they've currently got actually St. Vincent and St. Lawrence in place, which basically clones of each other, but with slightly different deck armor values, and slightly different, although the guns are the same in terms of caliber. If I'm got the figures the right way around, the St. Lawrence has a slightly longer baseline maximum range, a slightly shorter reload, fractionally worse dispersion, but much better Sigma. Got 2.0 Sigma versus St. Vincent has a 1.5. And also different torpedoes. The St. Lawrence, the one with the longer range guns, has 4-kilometer torpedoes. The St. Vincent has 10-kilometer torpedoes. Otherwise, in all other forms, the stats on them are relatively the same. Secondary batteries the same. And they're trying to compare and contrast and see whether the medium-range brawler, which is the St. Vincent, is better or worse than the long-range sniper, which is the St. Lawrence, which is kind of the long-medium-range sniper is the trend that all the others are following, at the moment at least. And interestingly enough, the torpedoes on these two, or this one, the tier 10, are pointing forward. The Queen Mary,
like forward-facing tubes,
underwater. They're underwater tubes, so they've got a limited degree of traverse. But yeah, if you've ever done torpedo jousting with the tier 3 German destroyer, basically imagine that, but with a slightly wider arc of fire. And you get 2 shots, but each shot can do like 20k damage. So if you end up going head to head with somebody at close range in in your tier 10 British battle cruiser, and you see them coming in, and they think, yes, well, I'm going to ram him because that seems like a brilliant idea. You can do like a 40k nope. Like, yeah, you might have like 30 for 35, 40,000 health left. Not anymore.
I mean, it might make up for weak noses because I think I'm not sure if any of those ships will have an icebreaker, but I think they only have like 25
mil, yeah. I mean, let's face it, if you're in a tier 10 ship, you don't necessarily want to find yourself nose to nose with somebody at point blank range. It's never a good situation to be in. But unlike most tier 10 capital ships, the tier 10 British ships do have an ace in the hole to turn the tables on everybody.
Well, it certainly will make life an interesting experience if somebody decides to be aggressive in one of these things.
Yeah. I mean,
they're towards you,
and they have engine boost. So, if you want to play super stealthy, sneak behind islands with engine boost and the speed skill equipped, plus its baseline speed, you can suddenly find like a 52,000 ton battle cruiser coming barreling around the corner at 36 knots, lobbing torpedoes your way, which is going to thoroughly confuse some people. But yeah,
does, just looking at it, have a much more spread out AA set as well. In fact, it almost looks kind of American with the amount of mounts that it has.
Yeah, there is quite a ridiculous amount. It splits. So there's 8 twin 6-inch. So you got four twin turrets per side, and 10 of the twin 4.5-inch. So you've got 5 turrets per side there. So you've actually got what's that? 9 twin turrets of secondary per side. Slightly more of contribute to the AA. The 6-inch obviously doesn't. But yes, I do have my St. Vincent currently built as a secondary build with a 10.5 kilometer range. It's not quite able to compete with a Schlieffen. But unlike the Schlieffen, I can charge in and still deliver full power broadsides and then chase him with torpedoes, as one Schlieffen has already found to his cost. Yeah, I mean, as I say, the armor isn't brilliant. You will take a fair bit of damage for a tier 10 capital ship when everybody inevitably starts going after you. And the reason that the I3s weren't the ones that the British chose was, as I said before, they just don't fit in a lot of the British docks at the time. But it's going to be interesting to see.
Which, on a kind of more historical note like that was always a big consideration for I think the UK particularly. Was like there's always various things like, will it fit through the Suez Canal, will it fit through the Panama Canal, but also, can we actually fit it in the docks that we have if we're going to be sending this off around the empire?
Yes, yeah. I mean, and this was one of the things, because Britain did have some fairly large docks in the UK. So if the UK was just worried about it, a home fleet based ship, one of these bigger designs probably could have been selected. But they had all these overseas docks in Gibraltar and Malta and later Singapore, and if you've got an empire to defend, the ships have to be able to dock in any one of them. If you're off fighting a war in, I don't know, the Western Pacific against Japan, if you end up with a damaged ship, you don't want to have to end up going, well, yeah, we're going to have to cart you halfway around the world before you can get repaired. And different countries had this problem in different ways. The Americans, weirdly enough, didn't have that problem much at all, in some ways because they were latecomers to the game. They only really got going with major naval build-up at the turn of the 20th century, but that meant they were able to, build and design shipyards and dry docks to the needs of 20th century shipping.
Yeah, I think their constraints were much more around the Panama Canal than anything
Exactly,
else.
Yes. Yeah. The Germans started off with this in kind of a similar position to the Americans, but they ended up building a lot of their major shipyards. They started building them slightly earlier, maybe 5-10 years, but they also ended up building a lot of them in fairly major built-up areas. So you look at like where Wilhelmshaven is, even on a map at the time, it's in the middle of an incredibly heavily built up city because there's not that many ports in Germany, which constrained them when it came to can we upgrade those dockyards in the future, which is one of the reasons why they had so many issues in World War II, because they only had so many large slipways. So when people say, what if they completed Graf Zeppelin? It just wasn't going to happen because they had the plans for Graf Zeppelin, but until they launched Gneisenau, there wasn't a slipway to put Graf Zeppelin on.
That ended up also being one of the major reasons. I've done a video on this very recently of why it was so important to then deny them the use of French dockyards.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, because the French really drew the short straw. They had some very small dockyards, and because they had a long legacy of being a major naval power, all the Brest, Cherbourg, Toulon, Bordeaux, all of these shipyards were in the middle of cities that were centuries old, sometimes even millennia old, and half of them were halfway up rivers as well, which really didn't help, launching across the rivers. And they were forever trying to find ways of increasing their dock capacity. But that's one of the reasons why when you play the Normandy and Lyon, they seem really dinky in size compared to some of the other equivalent ships. And that's basically because the French were constrained by, this is the biggest size of slipway we've got at the time. So you have to make whatever you want fit into that, rather than build the ship to the size that you want it to. And then they went off and after some economic problems in most of the interwar period, they extended their docks so that they could build the Dunkirks. And then they found they were going to have to build the Richelieus and discovered they didn't have docks big enough to build them. So they ended up having to do yet another round of expansion to their docks. And as you say, the Saint-Nazaire dock, which was built for the liner Normandy, it was the biggest one in Europe, but it was also the only one in France. You can't build an entire fleet around a single dry dock. And so, you had some very bizarre things in the interwar period in World War II, where you had the French basically building capital ships without their bows and sterns, launching the hull and then attaching the bow and stern afterwards, because that was the only way it was going to work. The British were kind of in a halfway house in that they had a similar legacy issue to that the French did. But because they were slightly ahead in terms of the Industrial Revolution, and thanks to being an island had slightly more coastline, they were able to extend a number of their slipways and dry docks a bit more than the French were in the early 20th century. So they were slightly less constrained than the French, but not tremendously much. And obviously they had the overseas issues. But to give you some idea of how constrained things were getting, if you ever get a chance to see some photos, and I can probably send you some afterwards as well, of Hood while she was under construction, in the shipyard that she was being built at, there were multiple slipways. Hood could only be built on one because it was directly opposite a tributary that came into the river. Any of the others, she would have just fetched up on the other side of the river, which would have been a bit embarrassing. But even then, when she was being built, you've got the slipway coming up. And then normally for slipways, you have a railway line, light rail, running down in front of it, which brings parts and so forth, and a walkway for the workers, and then buildings on the far side. And you see Hood, and you've got the slipway, and then Hood's hull just keeps going and going, and just crosses that entire distance, and then slots neatly between two buildings on the opposite side. So... there were some restrictions. It's like there was the one slipway where they could just about fit Hood in that shipyard. Her sisters were being built elsewhere until they got cancelled. But it kind of gives you an idea of just how confined some of these shipyards were getting in the 1920s when they were looking at ships that were approaching 1,000 feet long.
Some creativity required.
Yes. So that leaves us. Well, that's the line.
Yes.
And then we get on to the angry ship,
which is sort of a replacement to Nelson, kind of, I guess.
Oh yeah, Collingwood. I don't understand. I don't genuinely.
Considering you could have just had Rodney.
Yeah, you could have had Rodney. I mean, they're introducing torpedoes. What's Rodney famous for? Torpedoing Bismarck.
Yes.
It would have the single largest torpedoes in the game, even bigger than the long lances, because the long lances are 24 inches.
24?
24 and a half.
Yeah.
And actually, depending on which account you read, again, take with a pinch of salt, but depending on which account you read, possibly also the inspiration for the long lance, in terms of both their size and also the fact, although they don't use the pure oxygen that the long lances do, they did use an oxygen enriched mixture for their fuel. So according to some sources, back when the Japanese and the British were a little bit more friendly, they got a look in on some of the early plans for what would become the torpedoes on Nelson and Rodney and went, that's a good idea. We should go off and do something like that ourselves, except better. So, yeah, anyway, yeah, you could have had Rodney. Ostensibly, this thing is F2. So, as I mentioned, G3 and N3 were the ships the British would have decided to build. And then when the Washington Treaty came in, they were allowed to build a pair of ships with 16-inch guns. They had to decide what ships they were going to build. So they had O3, which broadly enough became the Nelsons. But the other option was a pair of designs called F2 and F3, which, as the letter suggests, were the battlecruiser options. Now this is why the Collingwood is very bizarre, because F2 and F3 were slightly less well protected than Nelson, although actually still fairly well protected, reasonably speaking. High speed, obviously, because they're battle cruisers, and 15-inch rather than 16-inch guns. So it's basically down an inch in armament compared to the Nelsons. An inch or two thinner armor compared to the Nelsons, but for that you get 30 plus knots battle cruiser speed.
F 24, 25, just for reference.
Sorry?
Just a reference to that Nelson was like, 24 knots?
23 knots officially.
Okay.
Rodney seemed to be able to go a bit faster than that when she really wanted to. But, these battle cruiser speeds on the F2 and F3, 30 plus. So, I mean, they would have actually been fairly respectable ships in World War II. F2, as the name suggests, would have had twins and F3 triples, and this was a Nelson-style layout. Now, with Collingwood, they seem apparently to have taken F2, but then cut the legs out from under it in terms of speed, because it's not battlecruiser speed, and slapped on the 16.5-inch guns at Tier 7. Which is... I don't know what's going on.
So this is fully invention of the Wargaming Design Bureau, pretty much.
Yeah. And the reason I think it's very bizarre is because this is coming out with the British battlecruisers, but it's slow. And it's got this very mysterious armament. Because let's face it, F3, which is what I thought they might bring in as the Tier 7 anyway. They've gone with Rook, which it's fine. It's a J3. I'm fine with it, but I thought they might bring F3 in instead. It's it would have been a 35,000 tonner, 29, 30 knots, maybe a bit faster depending on exactly which design spec they go with. Three triple 15s. Three triple 15s is what they've gone with Rook anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's certainly that would have been a suitable armament for Tier 7. And then the all-forward layout is a nice, unique British thing. But yeah, this thing, I'd have to look a bit further in and see if maybe there was an O2 that this thing might be. But the thing is, if it's an O2 instead of an O3, that also doesn't make too much sense because the Nelson, the O3 was a 16-inch ship doing 23 knots, and this is a 16.5-inch ship doing 25 knots. I haven't seen the armor stats for this thing, but if it is based on F2, then obviously it's going to have the battlecruiser armor. So
it doesn't really match with anything that you know of either way.
No, I'm. I mean, it's just, and it's just weird. It doesn't sit anywhere in anyone's design philosophy because it's too fast to be a line battleship from the 1920s. It's too slow to be a battle cruiser, and it's got 6-gun armament, which is not particularly comfortable at Tier 7, but it's got this very heavy for Tier 7 6-gun armament.
And bearing in mind the layout means you're going to be not always able to use even 6.
Yeah, you're basically going to be playing it a bit like a Nelson. I don't have an objection to the name. There's another Admiral name, Collingwood, so that's fine. But yeah, it's kind of that sour note for me.
It is odd when they could have definitely had much more historically fitting options that would have come along well with it being, a battlecruiser line that's being released. But yeah, it's a very odd choice.
It seems like they had an idea what they wanted to do with studs and then just, taking some resemblance to a British ship. Instead of starting with a design, they were like, we want this, and now let's make it look British.
Yeah, I'm not sure how this thing's going to play. I mean, it is in testing at the moment, but I've just kind of looked at it. And at the moment, I was just on principle. I'm not playing this thing. It's an abomination. I might make myself feel dirty by playing it. Oh well, it's yeah. I mean, on the one hand, it's got better armor than Indefatigable, so small silver linings.
I mean, after finally bringing British battle cruisers that people wanted for a long time and having some actual historical ships and existing designs, walking, we're like, this can't stand. We need our unicorn.
I mean, there's probably other previews mostly follow a pattern of not varying too wildly from historical designs, but having said that, there probably are some others that are not really that close to anything that might actually have ever been built or designed. So yeah, I guess it's just disappointing that we have one with such a historical and such an anticipated line.
Yeah, and with such a thin armor, it's like at 25 knots. The point of having thin armor on a battlecruiser is so you can run away. At least in this game, with 25 knots, you're not going to be able to run.
Yeah, you're probably just supposed to snipe at range.
Yeah.
But see, I see a way how to save this ship, right? So basically, they just give it unicorn camo, right? So imagine at the front you have like a unicorn statue, and then you just paint it like pink, also with rainbows. Just embrace the
fantasy element.
Yes.
You'd have to get a special voiceover from the guy who did the Skittles adverts. Every time it fires, you just hear "Taste the rainbow."
I'd play this in a heartbeat.
Yeah. To be fair, that's fair. I probably would, but yeah, I don't know. I really want to sit down with someone in Wargaming and ask what exactly they were thinking when they had all these other designs. I mean,
yes.
Even one of the later H3s would have been more, and the H3s, the F3s, whatever, would have been much better inclusions than whatever this is.
I mean, I wonder how much of it is like it does look very Nelson. I wonder how much of it is
just reuse the Nelson.
Trying to use as many elements from the Nelson model as they can, rather than model an entire new ship from scratch. But I don't know. Maybe they did have to model it entirely from scratch.
Yeah,
it's weird.
Well, I mean, if they were doing an F2 hull to start with, it is a bit different. But yeah, I just have confused face looking at this thing.
I have to say, even less. Like you would think that this versus something like the Atlantico, when we talked to you about that, and you're like, no, the Atlantico actually kind of, the design from when it came from and for who was pushing for it, that's actually kind of, it sort of makes sense. Versus, which looks a bit more sensible, but
it's basically kind of like they've taken all the designs that they didn't use, and then kind of chopped out all the various stats and names and everything, thrown them into a bingo rollerball selector, and just taken whichever ones have come out at the end. So it's just like, we're gonna have Nelson armament and 16.5-inch guns. And it's going to be slow. And we're going to take the whole of F3. No, F2. Okay, great. that seems to be the design process.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
So we've also... and we've got some ships left on this closed testing page. We've got the Huron and the Rio de Janeiro and the Hampshire, which is like a stretched Surrey class. But we've also got the now in testing, we'll just call them the Proto Dunkirk. So I don't know if you want to quickly say something about those.
Oh yeah, it's basically, here's all the Dunkirk and possibly edging on Richelieu design studies. Congratulations, we've made a cruiser line out of them. I mean, on the one hand, I kind of want to like them because I am quite a fan of the all forward firing arrangement. On the other hand, it is an entirely paper line. Although it does seem to be. I hesitate to say it because tempting fate and all that, but it does seem to be suggesting that they're looking at a second capital ship line for almost all of the various major factions. Because now we've got the British, have got battle cruiser line, the Americans are getting their kind of Tillman secondary battleship line. These are ostensibly cruisers, but let's face it, they're actually kind of battle cruiser-ish. They're just the other side of battle cruiser. So obviously the Germans have just had their battle cruiser line as well recently. So the Japanese, they had enough interesting designs to populate a second tree. I mean, admittedly, some of them have been used up in premiums, but there's probably enough for a Japanese second battleship tree. I mean, if they come up with some of the interwar Hiraga designs, that's going to be absolutely hilarious. People will lose their minds when they see them. Triple 6-inch turrets perched out on the bow. I can bet you when those come out, the first waves will just be, oh, this is just a wargaming vapor ship. But then finally they'll be able to sit back and go, no, look, the Japanese really were this bad. The number 13 would make an interesting companion for Yamato at tier 10. Because it's basically an early war Yamato. It's just fast. Same kind of guns, but faster and less well protected. So yeah, I'm wondering if that's maybe the next thing that's going to pop up, Japanese second battleship line. But I mean, what's the is it the Toulon, the French premium super cruiser thing that they've got at the moment?
I'm not sure. Maybe.
No idea.
Yeah, I've been playing one of them and kind of got on the one with all the fancy, the blue paint and the gold thingy at trumpeter at the front. Anyway, that seems to be. I think they're going to be nice to play. I do think they're going to be nice to play. Whether or not they're anything other than vaporware is another matter. But I'm not heartbroken. Put it this way: I'm not heartbroken over seeing them in the game. Because the French, they had plans. They did build a bunch of decent light cruisers and heavy cruisers. They did build the Dunkirks and the Richelieus. So seeing them in game is a lot more plausible than say Russian battleships. And some of the other choices. So yeah, I'm quite happy to see how it all plays out, and a bit more variety never hurts. Keeps everyone on their toes a little bit. The Huron is going to be an interesting one. There's yet another tribal. How many variants of the tribal can we have in game?
Well, I know some people will be happy with more tribals, but
yes. Oh yeah, definitely.
Quite a different play style than Cossack. And, yeah. While just discussing that, by the way, I said before we started, I was drinking a big mug of tea before we started. It's caught up with me, so I'm going to have to be totally unprofessional and disappear for a moment. But
fair enough.
Keep chatting.
Yeah. I mean, my only concern with Huron is it's going to suffer the same kind of, because it's modelling a version that has one of its aft gun mounts replaced by an AA gun mount. Let's face it, unless you're Haaland or something like that, destroyer AA doesn't really matter. So it's effectively just a nerf.
It's gonna be interesting. I mean, Huron is basically the apology ship for the little white mouse scandal we had last year.
Yeah.
So like Yukon was crap, right? And I never really fixed Yukon anyway. And now this is supposed to be an apology ship. So let's see. I mean, there are some stats on the Huron. I'm not sure yet it's gonna make sense, but after seeing what they've done like with the higher Italian destroyers recently, I don't have any confidence that Wargaming is not gonna fuck Huron up.
Yeah, I mean, we've already got Hyder in game, haven't we? Yeah.
Yes, and it looks like they're trying to make sort of a smokeless open water gunboat Hyder. I don't know if that's gonna work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to object to seeing another tribal in game, and the color scheme does look quite nice. Yeah, just kind of, it would have been nice to see her with a 4-gun armament, 4 mount armament, even to 8 guns, because otherwise at Tier 7 6 guns, it's all right, but we'll see. I'll say I don't object to it being in the game. I'm quite happy to see it in terms of coloration and the fact it's another tribal. I am just a little bit afraid of it. It may be slightly underpowered with only the 6 twin guns for its tier, but we shall see.
We shall see.
Yeah, and then we've got Rio de Janeiro. Yeah. Original flavor Agincourt with a flying bridge or the flying deck.
Yeah, it's just like an Agincourt that's not secondary focused, I think.
Yeah, and you've got this big flying deck with all the boats over the middle 2 turrets, which was deleted later in the design because someone realised, if you hit the lightly built flying deck structure that's covered in boats, then you basically were going to smother 2 of the gun turrets with wreckage. So that's probably not a brilliant idea.
I was going to ask about that, actually. I did wonder what that was.
It was a feature of actually a lot of late ironclads and some pre-dreadnoughts as well, this kind of flying deck where they were just trying to squeeze some boat handling area into a ship that maybe didn't have a lot of available deck space that was free of gun blast. But yeah, say with when they actually were building it, they went, yeah, that's a bad idea. Let's not do that. So this is kind of the early stage design for what would become Agincourt. I don't know quite why they're giving it more accurate main battery guns than with a faster reload than Agincourt, because historically speaking, this is the earlier variant. It should be the other way around. But as you said, if it's not secondary focused, so they've got to give it something.
It's probably also with like that center designer with the boats. They didn't think doesn't make sense. They were like, we want some slight visual differences and we want some slight gameplay differences.
Yeah, I mean, I don't object to the boat deck. It is a historical element of the design. It's just slightly bizarre to me that the earlier version somehow the main guns are better. Like that's not how it works, guys. But since they decided to make the Agincourt a secondary build ship, oh well. Game balance, I guess.
I have to say, once again, looking at this, And I think we speculated when the Atlantico came out as well that we might see a full South American battleship tree someday.
Yeah, although they're eating their way through the potential designs with premiums. So, I mean, there are enough designs that were put forward for the South American Dreadnought competition. We haven't seen the Rivadavias, the Minas Gerais, or the Almirante Littoral yet. So, that's at least 3, albeit, that's probably 3, 4, and 5. And then everything else gets a bit wiggly, but yeah.
The main necessarily stop them.
No, I mean the main problem you're going to have, I think, is that with a South American battleship line is that, much as I'd love to see it, that they don't, because of the various economic problems that the South American countries had in the early 1910s and onwards, they kind of stopped looking at battleships at kind of a Queen Elizabeth, slightly better than Queen Elizabeth design stage. So that, there's potential for a tier 6 with 16-inch guns, but 7, 8, and 9, there's not even paper designs because they just weren't looking. They weren't looking in the 30s and 40s. So unless you came up with something completely arbitrary, like here's a North Carolina, maybe that really weird North Carolina design study that had offset main battery guns all forward and said, okay, well, the Americans randomly have decided an alternate timeline to export this.
We've got some very odd premium versions of tech tree ships in the Pan-Asian tree that just make absolutely no sense for the ostensible nations that they're that the naming convention is after. So yeah.
It's just a shame that it's slightly too late. The time period of the game is just slightly too late. By that point, my beloved secondary home country of Bolivia had lost access to the sea, so I can't actually play the Bolivian Navy. Although, maybe I should ask them to put a Bolivian flag in game just for fun. That'll thoroughly confuse anybody who spends the inordinate amount of time to work out which national flag the ship is flying.
It's easy to mod in for yourself, but sadly, then no one else is going to see.
No one else is going to know. Yeah. Maybe they can make like a Mikasa company and have like the Huascar, the little ironclad that could, until it was captured, just puttering around. It's like its main strength is the fact it's so tiny it's almost impossible to hit.
And just give them a few more years if they get desperate for ship lines. I mean, we can petition for a lot of other things. Like I'm still waiting for the Austrian tech tree and the Swiss tech tree, and I mean,
or half tech trees at least, because I mean you've got the Ersatz Monarchs. There's the Tegethoff is already in game, so you've got at least one more tech tree beyond that. Or if they decide to go further back. I mean, this is in Mikasa is still the only pre-dreadnought in game, and hilariously bad as it is in competitive play, it's also hilariously funny. Especially when you go with a mighty secondary build Mikasa. So, there's plenty of pre-dreadnoughts around you could stick in as, cheap tier 2 premiums. I'd certainly play them. I'd probably collect them all as well, just for the laughs. Yeah, and then we've got these other 2 premiums that are being introduced, Hampshire and Clausewitz.
Yes. Now, Hampshire actually does look vaguely interesting.
Yeah, well, it's basically a county class that wants to be a Tone. Oh no, well, it's an Atago. It's a county class. They've got an extra. They've stretched the hull out and gone here. Have another gun turret. Although it's a reversed gun turret, but then at the same time, looking at it, it kind of looks like there's enough space under the back of B turret for the
possibly
C turret to swing its guns.
They're not super long barrels, so
no. And then that's a fair bit of overhang. I mean, if that C turret is able to do a complete 360 traverse, I'd actually be quite interested in it. If it's stuck doing the old Izumo style, you will be angry.
I mean, do you know much about was this like a serious proposal to create enlarged counties, or
No, this is
looking at?
No, when the British were actually looking at should we build heavy cruisers again in the late 30s, Surrey was kind of Surrey was the tail end of the counties, and then once you get past that, you're looking at triple 8-inch, which I think is already in the game, possibly, and then the ships that eventually have become Drake and Goliath, and technically speaking, if you really want to get into Churchill's fever dreams, the Gibraltar, the RP ship.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, most, if not all, of the actual late 1930s British heavy cruiser ideas have already been explored in the game.
Okay.
This is, I think this is kind of a wargaming special.
All right.
If it's, I mean, as you say, it looks nice. It looks interesting. It could, at tier 8, it could probably play fairly well. I'd certainly be interested in seeing how it goes. But at the same time, I'm not exactly going to jump up and down and go, "Oh yes, look, it's a historical British." No, it's not. If they want to do a truly absurd historical British design, just break out the K25s. I don't know if I've mentioned them on one of these before.
I don't think so.
Okay, you've seen a Dido.
Yes.
Or Dido, or whatever you want to call it. You've seen an Atlanta.
Yes.
Now meet the K25. That is those two turned up to 11. The K25 design series. At one point there was a design that had a quadruple stack twin 5.25 forward.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And another one that had four twin 5.25s, fore and aft, but arranged in a stepped diamond lozenge shape. So, yeah. What would that be? That'd be 8, 10, 12, 14 5.25s. So in a quad stack forward and a triple stack aft. Or you could have the diamond lozenge forward if you wanted to, or have the diamond lozenge forward and the diamond lozenge aft. So that would be 16 5.25s, except you'd only have a 12-gun broadside, but you'd have an 8-gun fore and aft salvo, which would be quite funny.
Indeed, I might have found a picture of the forward turret.
Yes,
one, which is
it's a bit special.
Yeah.
That as a premium, probably what tier with 5.25 is probably a tier 7 or something like that.
Yeah, I don't think you could go beyond that without some serious you'd have to give it smoke, like a decent smoke to put it tier 8 or above.
Yeah, but it would be quite funny to see that in the game again, just more just to see people look at it and go, "What the heck is this?" And I mean, this is one of the things that makes me annoyed about further annoyed about the Collingwood is, you come up with these slightly odd fantasy ships. If you want something that looks weird and bizarre and will make people question your sanity, you don't need a fictional ship. There are plenty of real world designs out there that are even madder than things that most people could think you might be able to get away with.
Mm-hmm.
And that being one of them.
Well, I certainly didn't know they existed up until now, so
I didn't either. It looks
well, congratulations. You now know.
All that's left after that is the previously mentioned Catributors, which is going to be super cruiser.
Super cruiser, 12-point-something-inch guns, 12 guns. I mean, it's
210mm. It says here.
Yeah, so it's 210. Sorry, so that's 8. What 210?
I think that's the same caliber as the York, but I'm going to guess it's not the same guns as the York.
8.26. That's World War I caliber. That's almost the same caliber that the original flavor Scharnhorst and Gudeisenau had.
Right.
Which is okay, odd, but it's clearly a World War II era design. And it's a super ship as well.
Yeah, I mean it's supposed to be just a slightly bigger Hindenburg, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's that point. It is kind of, yeah, it's a beyond paper design at that point, isn't it? I mean, it looks like it'll be fairly interesting. Probably just as annoying to fight as a Hindenburg.
Yeah.
More torpedoes.
One of the things and I guess this might change, but it doesn't actually have a super ship mechanic. It doesn't have any
the charge ups.
anything main secondaries, anything like that. So it will just be a tier 11 Hindi, I think, essentially.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how it goes. I
suppose they just needed it more tier 11, so they went with, okay, we have no idea, just make a Hindenburg slightly bigger. Give her a few more millimeter guns, because, slightly bigger.
Yeah. Well, they've already gone for the absurd super battleships for the Germans, so they can't go that route. They've already got some implausible carriers, so and you've got the Elbing, so the cruiser's the only place left to go.
I suppose we've already got the kind of O-class evolutions at tier 9 with the Asia and the Siegfried as well.
Yeah.
Also, I would say they need a lot of ships fast for the super ships, right? So they didn't have as much time to put research or whatever into it, so they just needed something they could throw out quickly.
Considering that post-World War II, especially like cruiser and battleship designs tended to dry up reasonably fast. I mean, what the last all-gun cruiser designed... Was it like the Chapayevs that were the last ones that were designed and in service?
The Sverdlovs.
Sverdlovs, that was it.
Yeah.
So, they were definitely an outlier. So I think, especially with like the sort of tier 9, tier 10 German cruisers being fairly fictionalized anyway. I mean, if you're going to put a tier 11 after that, it has to be even more fictional.
Yeah, I mean, a fair number of these fictional ships, I think, are they have struck me as kind of, well, we've taken our tier 10 and added a thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's like mostly a turret. I mean, it's like Patrie, the French super battleship they're testing. It's basically Republique with an extra turret.
I think that's one where I think was it last week? They're removing the alternate firing mode from that, whatever it was supposed to have as well. So I think they've the idea that all super ships are going to have some kind of special different mechanic to them. I think they may have stopped that idea because it's like there's only so many gimmicks you can put in, I think.
Yes.
Maybe they didn't want to paint themselves into a corner with having to build everything around a gimmick. So
yeah, well, I think I to be honest, I'm in two minds about them because I think on the one hand they're so absurdly ahistorical, most of them, that the gimmicks might as well. But on the other hand, as you say, one coming up with gimmicks for everyone might be a bit difficult. The second thing is because the super ships are showing up in tier 10 games, it probably makes them a little bit too OP. Considering they're already bigger, nastier, meaner, more guns, etc. Giving them that as well is going to, well, I think it probably was annoying players quite a bit. If they had, and maybe they will in the future, like a full super ship line, a full tier 11, if you like, line across the board, then they could introduce a separate super game mode. And then maybe re-implement all the gimmicks, and then everyone could just go off and play in a corner with the super ships, killing each other with all the funny gimmicks and everything, which will be, it'll be a very separate experience to main gameplay, but I can see it working in that sense.
Yeah, I honestly don't know why they just didn't straight up call it Tier 11. I mean, that's what it effectively is. It does have what amounts to Tier 11 matchmaking. So, yeah, it's an odd one.
It might just be like a marketing thing, or it might just be because they said that the highest tiers would be Tier 10. Maybe it's sort of, don't want to go into promise. I don't know, or maybe it's because they want to rework the economy at this tier.
Once upon a time, though, we thought we would never have submarines, so things can change.
Yeah, of course, but you don't need to, like, you usually try to hide the lie, right? You try to not to be so obvious about it. We said there would never be Tier 11 ships. We never said there wouldn't be super ships. We also never said there wouldn't be mega, super, ultra hyper ships.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, and I know this will probably get me a bit of hostility, but I'm not 100% entirely opposed to submarines.
Death, Drachinifel.
I mean, the thing is, well, as I know, probably preaching to the choir with you guys, having been playing the game since before it went public, the idea of, oh no, this bunch of annoying things are coming up and firing torpedoes at me and ruining my day. We had this with destroyers at the beginning of the game. And then we had it with carriers, and to a certain extent, we still have it with carriers. And now we have it with subs. I think personally, my feeling on subs is that I can see why people get annoyed with them, but they are a gameplay type, if you want to call it that has a very low skill floor, but also an exceptionally high skill ceiling. And I know, mining stats doesn't really necessarily reflect everything in the game, but when you do look at the stats, like I think something like 3/4 to 4/5 of all sub players never break 20k damage. At which point they basically have a negligible impact on the game.
Yeah,
they just die.
That's fair. That definitely ties in with my sort of anecdotal experience of you do see a lot of sub players, near, if not at the bottom of the team list.
Yeah, but when you get that 1 in 5 sub player who actually knows what he's doing, it's kind of there is no middle ground. It's either the sub is easy meat or just why are there torpedoes everywhere? Why does it hurt so much? Please make it stop. And when you experience that, then I can understand at that point why you'd be incredibly salty about the subs. But at that point, okay, maybe the invisibility mechanics are probably increasing the frustration because you're like, I can't shoot back at this thing. But to be fair, if someone comes along who is really, really, really good in a game, they're going to ruin your day, whatever they're playing. I think the main rage with the subs and the CVs is that usually, at least if somebody shows up in a cruiser, a destroyer, or a battleship to ruin your day, you can at least shoot back at him.
Yes, I think that is the heart of the issue. Is the counterplay versus players that really know what they're doing. The thing that's always confused me is that we had an entire redesign of the CV class because we had this mismatch between good players and bad players, and I don't think a good sub player versus a bad sub player doesn't quite have the same effect as old RTS CVs, but it's still, there is still a noticeable difference in terms of the impact they can have. So I like the fact that they went out of their way to address this with CVs, and then they've introduced a whole new class where this is a very specific issue. Still, is it's always been a bit weird to me.
I mean, I try and kind of split down the middle. If I'm playing a sub, I try and split down the middle and go, okay, I know just by playing a sub, everyone's going to hate me in the game, but I'm just going to submerge and run at full speed down an area where I think there won't be too much sonar, and I'm going to go and hunt the carrier. Because then the two great evils cancel each other out, and everybody else can play happily.
I suppose that's true.
Yeah, but it takes you a long time to reach that carrier because you aren't that fast and the carrier is probably very far in the back. So by the time you reach it and sink it, the damage is done.
I think to be honest, my main gripe is double sub games, especially double sub games where you then have a CV in play as well. There's just that, 3 fewer surface ships does have a big impact on the gameplay, and plus you can then end up like if even one of those enemy subs is like worth their salt, or even if they're, you heaven forfend get a division of sub players. That could be a pretty unpleasant experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying subs are perfect, and I'm not saying I thoroughly embrace them, because I have the same kind of rage moments when you're just like, why are there torpedoes coming my way, and where are my destroyers, and like where is the sonar and the hydro search, and why is everybody else so stupid, and why am I dying to torpedoes I can't shoot back against? I get it. My only caveat is that you probably ruin more subs days than sub days ruin yours. It's just you really remember the latter.
I mean, the problem in my opinion is the lack of counter. And that's like if you're a good player and you meet another good player, right? You know how to sort of counter ships. And yes, there are bad matchups. So like if you're in a destroyer against too much raider and so on, it's not like every ship is capable of dealing with every situation, right, equally well. But there is no real counter to carriers, and there's no real counter to like submarines, right? Like with a carrier, you'd think if you pick an anti-air ship, you'd be able to shoot down the planes, but not really. Like you can't really defend yourself against it. Against a submarine, you can't really detect the submarine because it just dives. And even Hydro only can detect it at 2 kilometers, and by that point, it's so close that it just surfaces and shoves up all the torps into you. Yeah. And it's just incredibly frustrating game design, because no matter how good you are, no matter how experienced you are, you know that there is no way to counter it. You just have to deal with it, right? And it's a lot more frustrating situation. And if I know that I'm in a bad matchup against like the enemy team composition or so on, then it's less frustrating as if knowing that nothing I could bring or do would be able to counter this, right?
Yeah, no, I get it, and I suppose I think the root cause of it, the problem is that we're playing a game with different classes of ships, which were designed and have been designed for hundreds of years in various forms to cooperate together. And we're in a game where it's usually 15 individuals fighting 15 individuals. That's why divisions usually end up being so OP, because the power of cooperation, it's like these ships are designed to cooperate together. If they start cooperating together, if you balance the game for single players and people start cooperating, everything goes to pieces very quickly. But at the same time, things like ostensibly the counterplay to subs would be destroyers. But if you're not playing a destroyer, you're out of luck at the moment in the game. But if you're in a division, you've got a destroyer, a cruiser, and a battleship cooperating together, it probably doesn't matter if you've got the best sub player on the planet, because your destroyer friend will just hunt him down with his hydro, and then the other two can just drop depth charge planes on him. But that is team play in a game where you don't usually have team play. So to say to most people, oh well, the counterplay to subs is team play. Well, that actually you might as well say that the counterplay to subs is wishful thinking, because it's not going to happen.
See, here's the problem: subs counter destroyers, not the other way around. Most destroyers don't even have hydro, which means they can't even detect the sub. They have no chance of detecting a sub. The subs outspot the destroyers, so the subs can keep the destroyer spotted. And the destroyer gets just focused down. Subs are so incredibly fast that even if you know where it is, you probably can't catch up with the depth charges and actually drop it. And if you're very close quarters, if you're charging a sub that comes towards you, the sub can easily one-shot the destroyer, and the destroyer can't do anything about it. So a good submarine counters a destroyer. If you want to have a chance in a destroyer, you need one of the few that have hydro. There are some these days, but not all, because then at least you can have some way of detecting the sub. But even then, even if you keep running after it with hydro, it's comical because the sub's so fast that you very, very slowly try to catch up with hydro, because you can't do anything unless you basically overtake it and then drop the depth charges. So you're utterly relying on somebody with planes to come in.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. As I say, it's kind of they're a ship class where the best counterplay is friends, and yeah, it's that's not going to happen in a lot of the time. So
trying to rely on random teammates is a variable experience.
Might as well just blow yourself up and yeah. I mean, I kind of like playing subs, but at the same time, I wouldn't miss them if they were gone. I think.
I mean, in my more strident moments, I just grumble and think, right, I want them out of the game. I just want them gone. No more subs. But when I'm feeling a bit more reasonable, I do acknowledge that there are modes in which, like, you know, convoy and like modes that were built around the idea of subs. That they actually potentially could be quite fun in. You know, operations is absolutely a prime example. A sub-based operation could actually be really quite fun. But that then becomes, you know, that's a much more constructed experience. That's a thing that's been built around specifically subs and sub mechanics, and so you don't have this mismatch that you potentially have with trying to stick them in randoms and random behavior of random other players that are playing with you, and so they could have a place in the game. That place, I don't think it should be in my random matches.
Yes, maybe some kind of special unlock ship or something. Yeah. Oh, I mean, we'll just have to see how it goes.
Hopefully, they take the feedback and don't completely shoehorn them in.
Yes, hopefully. Yeah. Oh well, we'll have to see. I'm much more excited for the British battle cruisers, to be honest.
Definitely.
And
I mean, you say that now, but you just wait until they introduce the K3, or was it the K3, the steam-powered sub?
Oh yeah, the K class. No, you see, that's what they should do. Instead of trying to have subs as like genuine underwater threats with torpedoes and stuff, they should just introduce the comedy series. Have subs as the comedy. So you have M1 and M1 with its ridiculous 12-inch gun. And M2 and I-400, the submarine aircraft carriers, and Surcouf with the twin 8-inch guns, and X1 with its pair of 5.5-inch guns, and like you say, and the K class with their complete inability to decide whether they're up, down, or in between, and like the 15-minute dive time. Introduce those, and no one will have a problem with subs, because they'll be hilariously easy to kill, and they'll die so amusingly that even the sub players won't mind. And on the rare occasion they actually accomplish something, everyone will be so shocked, dash, you know, rolling off their seat in laughter. No one's going to care. So let's face it, if a submarine pops up next to you at point like 300 meters and drops a 12-inch shell into you before disappearing or being run over by a destroyer, everybody's going to be having a laugh. Yeah, I think that's the solution.
A comedy relief line.
Yeah, comedy subs. You have a little timer on the K class. It's like, this sub will be diving in 5 minutes.
Yeah, it takes 3/4 of the battle if you want to submerge.
Oh dear.
So, I think that's about it, really. We've covered everything we just about wanted to. It's been kind of a light week in terms of news, so we thought it would be a really good opportunity to get you on to have a more substantial chat.
There is a small matter. That there is a recent thread there on the forums where Wargaming has explained how super containers work these days. So basically,
yes, we were going to briefly touch on that as well. Yes.
Yeah, it's just very brief. So basically, if you get your daily containers, you get a certain amount of points, and you need to reach a random number between 0 and 100, and once you reach that number, you get a super container, and then that number gets rerolled. So it could be that like you need 50 points to reach a super container. That means every crate gives you 1.5 points, and once you get to 50, then you get a super container. It gets rerolled. Maybe next time it takes you 70 points or whatever. So there is basically a maximum number of containers that you can pull, and then you definitely get a super container. There is the try your luck containers give you 4.5 points, and the regular containers give you 1.5 points. So
it's interesting to see the thinking behind it, in that okay, it's not totally random. You're never going to get, like 5 super containers in a row, but at the same time, you're never going to go for too long without getting a super container, so long as you're playing the game enough to get the daily container drops. So it's I think it's actually a fairly balanced way of doing things. To be honest, it's quite reasonable, all things considered.
And you now also know that getting try your luck containers gets you the next super container 3 times as fast as pulling regular ones.
Yes.
And there is a certain addition here later. Basically, all containers that you open sort of count. So if you make a mission or something, and you get like 10 random credit containers or whatever, they count towards your progress towards your next super container.
Does it say it includes bought containers? Because that would be interesting. You could potentially, like, if that was true.
They say, all containers such as more credits, resources, try luck are progressing through that bar. Doesn't matter how you obtained the container. For example, in previous update, there were consecutive bundles for the balloons, and there were something like 20 resource containers in one bundle. And that progresses you towards a super container.
So potentially you could, in some circumstances, spend some doubloons, buy some containers, and actually increase your progress towards. That's interesting.
Yeah, there's always an element of RNG in all these things, but the fact that there's like I think it's probably it's a good idea to be able to go, you buy X number, or you open X number of containers, eventually you are going to end up with a super container by arbitrary point, rather than you could end up opening containers till the end of time, and if the dice gods are against you, you get nothing. That's definitely a bit more welcome.
Yeah, so there is a limit how unlucky you can get now, basically.
Yes. yeah, which is that's never a bad thing. Or you could just play enough that you don't need to get super containers, but
you are going to be super disappointed once you open that super container anyway.
Yes, this is true.
Yeah, but most often it's going to be flags. But I think I've actually had 1 or 2 this year where it's been like, oh, here's 1,000 doubloons, which is always quite nice. It's been a while since I've gotten a ship from a super container, but that's largely to do with the fact that while there was a CC, we got an awful lot of the ships given to us anyway. So it's
collected enough of them that it was just the game was probably just like, you've got here's some doubloons. Just imagine it's going through. It's like, oh, we don't want to give him that one. We're just opening it like a Missouri.
Also having a quick glance at the end. I think this was also mentioned in the in-game chat. So just some very brief news. There's also a Huron design. Like we were talking about community design camos before. So there's actually one going on at the moment for the Huron. Which is let's see, submission deadline 4th of June, and then the winners are announced on the 14th of June after the voting process. So that's available if you want to try your hand at scribbling away on the little template the design template they've provided. There's also a compensation article for, I didn't notice this myself, but they said they had some server issues in the last day, so you can hop on and get a wargaming container, which will give a day of premium and some flags.
That's
just
nice.
In case you hadn't noticed that on the portal.
Fair enough.
So right. I think that's just about it. So as ever, where can we find you, Mr. Drachinifel?
I remain on YouTube as Drachinifel. You can also find me on Twitter, because apparently you have to have at least one form of social media. So yeah, if you want to see me being snarky in 180 characters, that's usually where to find me. But yeah, mostly on YouTube. There's also a Discord server where you can meet like-minded naval history people and talk about things. And yeah, that's basically me. Other than to mention, in the potential event that anybody listening is from Canada, I am going to be in Canada for a week. In a couple of weeks' time, heading up to Canada on Friday the 3rd, so exactly 2 weeks from today.
Nice. Okay. You're not long back from the US as well.
No, I mean, that took me a week to recover. Fortunately, this is only a week's trip, and I don't have to change time zones 4 times in 5 days, which, is always a plus. So yeah, obviously going to see Haida, going to see Sackville, couple of other places as well. Might pop down across the border to see the Sullivans after she's been fished out of the water after she prematurely sank. So yeah, that should be fun. See what America's hat is like. or maybe I'm going to travel to the real country after having seen Canada's trousers. You never know. I think that one will probably go down better with the locals.
Possibly.
So yeah, that's me.
And for anyone that isn't somehow subscribed to Drax channel, his latest one is on a ship that's very relevant to Warship fans. It's on the Alaska class. So
yes, and I would like to say on public record, I hadn't actually gotten around to watching Jingle's video on them. It's in my to watch later list, and I'm now slightly scared to do so because half the comments were just like, "Oh, you tell Jingles it's not a battle cruise." It's like, I honestly did not time this. Okay? I had this video in production for a long time. It was ready to go. I put it up there. It is completely coincidental. Yeah, I don't know how many people believe that, but it is the truth. Oh dear.
Well, and with that totally not conspiracy, we wish you all a good night, I guess.
Yeah. See you guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.